In this video, we're going to look at multiplication and division of integers. We'll look at the rules for signed numbers. In this case, the focus will be on integers. We did a video on addition and subtraction, so I want to review those rules quickly. So here are some review problems from the last video. You want to pause the video and see if you can work these out, and then I'll come back. Okay, let's go through these. I'll go through the rules as we go through the solution of these. We had mentioned that if you're adding two integers, and these could be numbers, any number, doesn't have to be an integer, but we're going to focus on integers. This is what my granddaughter is working on right now. She's in the 6th grade, and this is the basics of algebra. If you can't work numbers or solve problems with signed numbers, in this case integers, you're going to have trouble in algebra. So you need to master the rules for adding, subtracting integers or numbers, and multiplying, dividing integers, or just general numbers. So we said if you're adding integers with the same sign, you bring down the sign and just add them. In other words, you think of the number line, you're going in the same direction. So in this case, since they're both negative, I know the answer is going to be negative. So just to emphasize that, I'm going to put the negative outside, and then just add them. 9 and 5 is 14, and you bring down the sign. If this had been a positive 9 and a positive 5, of course, same thing. 9 and 5 is 14. The sign is positive, so we don't need the negative. In this case, second problem, we had negative 7 and a negative 4. Signs are the same. So again, you can do this mentally. I'm just doing it this way, so just to emphasize the rule. So we bring down the sign, and the numbers are the same. 7 and 4 is 11, and I bring down the sign. That's a negative. And this had been a positive 7 and a positive 4. The answer is positive 11. So I wouldn't put the negative there. I just leave it 11. Now the thing is when you're adding numbers, in this case integers with different signs. So for number 3, I have 10 plus or add a negative 6. So there you're going 10 units. Think of the number line, you're going 10 to the right and then 6 back. So that's actually a subtraction. So in the rule there is if you're adding two integers with different signs, subtract. Ignore the sign and just subtract the smaller from the larger. So in this case it would be 10 subtract 6. And because the 10 is on the positive side, you're going to stay in the positive side. It's a larger number. So take the sign of the larger. 10 is positive, so positive. In this case, 10 subtract 6 is 4. So it's a positive 4. Is it wrong if you put the positive? No, you can put the positive there, but it's understood. Positive is understood. If the number doesn't have a sign, it's understood to be a positive. So that's positive 4. In the same way for the next one, we have a negative 11 plus a positive 8, even though the positive sign is not indicated. You subtract. So just take the larger number, 11, disregarding the sign, 11, subtract 8. In this case, the larger number has a negative, so the whole thing's going to be negative. So now subtract 11, subtract 8 is 3. And then bring down the negative. Now you don't have to do this, you don't have to put the parentheses, you can just say, okay, it's a negative and a positive, so I know I'm going to subtract 11, subtract 8, and then which one has the negative sign? 11, the larger number has a negative. If that had been a positive and a negative here for the negative 8, then this would come out positive. So if you have a positive 11 at a negative 8, then this is positive 3. So those are the rules for addition. If the signs are the same, bring down the sign and add. If the signs are different and you're adding, you subtract the smaller from the larger, disregarding the sign, and then you take the sign attached to the larger one. Now if you have a regular subtraction, so if you have, say, 12 subtract negative 3, the rule here was learn the rules for addition of signed numbers, in this case integers, and then if you have a subtraction like this, just make it into an addition. So change the minus or the subtraction to a plus, and take the opposite of the number you're subtracting. So opposite of a b is minus b. So in other words, you have a subtraction, change it to addition using this, and then here when you work with these two, follow the rules for addition. So in other words, in the next one then, 12 subtract negative 3. Write that as an addition. So change the subtraction to a plus, and then take the opposite of the number you're subtracting. The opposite of a negative 3 is a positive 3. Now you just follow the rules for addition. You're adding two integers, both positive, so you just add the numbers. 12 and 3 is 15. Bring down the sign. They're both positive, so of course the answer is positive. For the next one, if negative 13 subtract 5. So let's write it. Negative 13. Change the subtraction to addition. That becomes a plus. And then you take the opposite of 5. The opposite of 5 is a negative 5. Okay, opposite of a positive 5 is a negative. Now you're adding, so but you have a negative 13 and a negative 5. Signs are the same. Bring down the sign and add the two numbers. 13 and 5 is 18. The answer is negative 18. Now, if you have more than one number, or more than two, you got 3 or 4 or 5, just take two at a time. So let's take these first two first, here. So here I have negative 4 plus a negative 3. Adding two numbers from the same sign, we bring down the sign and add the two numbers. 4 and 3 is 7, becomes a negative 7. And on the next one then, let's take these two now. You can look at this as a negative 6, okay, because we separated this from this one, so negative 4 and a negative 3. Or, just to make it more straightforward here, let me just do this. Let me just say, let me rewrite it for you in case this confuses you. So I have negative 4 plus negative 3. I'm going to write everything with addition, just to make it easier. So here you can look at this as subtraction. So I'm going to write that as a plus. So we're subtracting 6. The opposite then of a 6 is a negative 6. And then this will be plus 7. And here I'm subtracting a negative 3. So again, change that to addition. Opposite of a negative 3 is a positive 3. Now once you have everything as an addition, then you just follow the rules for addition. You can take any two you want. So if I take negative 4 and negative 3, that's a negative 7. Now I can add the negative 6 to that. Or I can just say 7 and negative 7 cancel. Or I could just add these two next. So negative 6 and 7. I'm adding two numbers with different sides, so I subtract 6 from 7. That gives me a 1. And the larger number is positive, so I put a plus here. And I bring the next one down, plus 3. So either way you want to do it, you can add the negative 7 and the 1 first. That's going to give you a negative 6. You can add the 1 and the 3, that's 4. So if I add these two first, that gives me a 4. And then negative 7, add 4. Now again, follow the rules for addition. I'm adding two numbers with different signs, negative 7 and a 4. So I subtract, disregard the sign, subtract the smaller from the larger. 4 from 7 is 3. And the larger number 7 has a negative, so the answer is negative. There you have it. Now, today we want to look at multiplication of integers. So let's suppose I have 2 times negative 3. Just so you understand the rule a little bit better here. So 2 times negative 3. Now, that were a positive 3, as 2 times 3 would be 6. So if it's 2 times a negative 3, that means that's the same thing as adding 2 negative 3. So negative 3 plus negative 3. Negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. Now if I switch these around and put the negative 3 first, the 2, you can still say negative 3 times 2 is the same thing as 2 times negative 3. So this still means 2 negative 3's, which is still going to be negative 6. Now what happens if you have a negative 3 times, I put these in parentheses, you don't have to, but times negative 4. Now one way you can think of this is bring out the negatives, so it becomes a double negative over here, and just put the numbers together. 3 times 4. 3 times 4 is 12. And anytime you have a double negative, just like in the subtraction, when you're subtracting a negative, they became add the opposite. Or here, these cancel each other out. So this is 12. So the rules for multiplication or division of integers are probably easier than the ones for addition and subtraction. So here are the rules. Positive times a positive. So here we're talking about numbers. Now, the focus for this video is integers, but this works for any number. It could be decimals, it could be fractions. Anytime you multiply two numbers that are positive, the answer is going to come out positive. 5 times 10 is 50, both positive. Negative 5 times negative 10. Just multiply numbers. What's 5 times 10? 50. Time you have a double negative, they cancel each other out. So positive times a positive gives you a positive. Negative times a negative gives you a positive. Now when you multiply two numbers and one is positive and one is negative, it doesn't matter which one, it's always going to be negative. Negative times a positive will give you a negative. Positive times a negative will give you a negative. Negative 2 times 5 times negative 3. Here are the rules for multiplication. So when you're multiplying more than two numbers, you can do any two at a time. So let's look at these two right here. A negative 2 times 5. Multiply the numbers. 2 times 5 is 10. And if it's a negative, if they're opposites, the answer is always going to be negative. So this is going to be negative 10. So now we have negative 10 times negative 3. So negative times a negative is a positive. Again, the negatives cancel each other out. I can bring those two negatives in front, and then 10 times 3 is 30. And the answer comes out to a positive 30. So again, multiplication of two positives is a positive. Multiplication of two negatives is a positive. The only time it comes out negative is when one is positive and the other one is negative. If you have more than two numbers multiplied, like I said, just two at a time, and follow the rules. Negative 6, negative 2, negative 5 equals to what number? So again, you can do two at a time. Doesn't matter how you do this. Negative 6 times a negative 2. Multiplying two negatives, the answer is always going to be positive. So just do the regular multiplication. 6 times 2 is 12. The product of these two is positive. And then we have another number though. So then we do the other multiplication. This is a positive 12 now and a negative. I know if when I multiply two numbers with opposite signs, over here, a negative, positive is negative, positive, negative is negative. So in this case, it's always going to be negative. So I just multiply these out. 12 times 5 is 60. The answer is negative 60. Now it's important to know here that let's suppose you're multiplying. I'm going to assume you can multiply numbers. The problem is, can you determine the sign? Let's suppose you're multiplying a negative, another negative, a positive, a negative, and a positive. Is the answer going to be positive or negative? You have to be able to determine the sign. Well, let's look at this. Negative times a negative, this is going to be positive. This product will be positive. Negative times a negative is a positive. And of course, positive times positive, of course, is positive. So if you don't have any negatives left, the answer is going to be positive. Negative times a negative is a positive. Positive times a positive is a positive. So if you have a lot of numbers to multiply, and you just have trouble determining what the sign of the answer is going to be, positive or negative. Just count the negative ones that you have. So have 1 there, 2, 3, and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have an even number of negatives and you're multiplying, the answer is always going to be positive. If you have an odd number of negatives, the answer is always going to be negative. And the reason for that is anytime you have an even number, you can pair them up. So these two go together. That's positive. These two go together. Negative, negative, positive. And if you don't have any negatives left, the answer is always going to be positive. So if I have a negative times a negative times a negative, that's an odd number. These two, whatever numbers those are, whether they're integers or fractions, this product will give me a positive, but I'll have a negative left over. So the product of 3 factors, or 3 numbers, they're all negative. The answer is always going to come out negative, negative. Now, we're talking about multiplication. Those are the rules, pretty straightforward. And for division, if you know the rules for multiplication, division is pretty much the same. Use the same rules. So positive divided by a positive is a positive. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. Again, just like with multiplication, the only time the answer is going to come out negative is when one is negative and the other number is positive. Negative divided by a positive is a negative. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. So just look at a few examples here. Negative 10 divide. I'm just going to put it over say 2. So that's the same thing. When I write negative 10 over 2, that's the same thing as saying negative 10 divided by 2. So just look at the numbers. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And it's a negative divided by a positive. So you can see the rule then. This is going to be negative. 20 divided by 2 is 10. 100 divided by 50 is 2. No problem when they're both the same sign. If you have a negative 40 divided by a negative 10, negative divided by negative is positive. So you know the answer is going to be positive. And then just do the regular computation here. 40 divided by 10 is 4. Negative 2 over 5. So it's a negative divided by a positive. The answer is going to be negative. And this doesn't reduce, it's already in lowest terms, so I can just leave it as negative 2 over 5. Negative divided by positive is a negative. Now, I want to point out that the rules we're going over here are going to work for any kind of number, not just integers. So if I give you, say, minus negative 1/2 times a negative 1/3, here you're multiplying fractions, but you still follow the same rules. Got a negative times a negative, so I know the answer is going to be a positive. And then, of course, you multiply fractions by just multiplying the numerators. 1 times 1 is 1. Multiplying the denominators, 2 times 3 is 6. And then, of course, the sign negative times a negative is a positive. 1 over 6 is reduced. You have it. It's very important, though, to master the rules for adding and subtracting integers. Those rules, again, work for fractions. When you get into fractions and so forth, it's going to be the same rules. So practice working the problems, and we'll see you next time.